Welcome. In this video, we're going to cover how to track virtual page views in Google Analytics. So what is a virtual page view? Well, the way a page view normally works is when a browser loads or reloads a web page with Google Analytics tracking, the page view hit is sent to Google Analytics and it reports in the interface. But you can send virtual page view hits to Google Analytics without loading or reloading a page. And there are a few cases where this is helpful. One is if you have anchor links on a page. So these are links on a page that link to another section of your page. For example, if you have a table of contents at the top of your page that links to another section within your page. Another case where this is useful is if you have a multi-step process. For example, if you have a registration process or a cart checkout process for purchases where the page doesn't reload but the user just advances from step to step, then this is useful as well. The other case is for single page applications. So single page applications also do not require pages to reload in order to display new content. One of the characteristics to identify where you can employ virtual page views is if the page that you're viewing or the page that the user is engaging with has the domain and the page path remain the same, but they're loading new content with their engagement. So if they're clicking through, if they click on an anchor link, or if they click through various steps, and the page URL, the page domain, and page path remain the same. Now, this isn't necessarily the case with the single page applications because you can still load a new URL. You can still call a new URL when users navigate to new pages or load new content. But in this video, we're only going to cover the cases where the engagement happens on one page. So this is engagement that you want to track as a virtual page view. For our first case, what we're going to do is track virtual page views for anchor links. So this will be for pages with table of contents, for example, or just any links, any anchor links on the page to another section of the page. So here on our test website, we have the table of contents. And for this web page, we have these sections, these headers, along with links to these headers in the table of contents. And the way that this is set up is there is an ID that links to these sections of the web page. So for example, web hosting website builder, that links to this fragment here that with the hash mark at the beginning and then hosting dash builders. So if we double click on this and then click on inspect, we can see that the ID matches the link from the table of contents, hosting.builders. If we inspect it again, we'll click on this arrow up here and then hover over it. We'll click on it. So this hash mark, hosting-builders, is referring to this H1 header. So that matches the ID here. So if we look at the code, this is how it's set up. So here's our table of contents along with the 3 items there. And then each of those links respectively to their section. So for hosting builders, here's the href with the hash mark and then the ID that matches it. So if you need to set up these IDs and the links, if you don't have access to the code yourself, get a developer to help you set this up. So back to this. So when we click on one of these links, it'll bring us to that section of the page. Since we have web hosting, CMS website builders, let's just click on one of those to see what it does. So I clicked on Content Management System, CMS website builders, and it brought me to this section. So in order to track the virtual page view for this, we need to do a couple things. Make sure you have a Google Tag Manager account and that it's installed on your website. If you need to install it, after you create the account, you can just click on Admin and then go to the section to install Google Tag Manager and follow the instructions. But once your Google Tag Manager has been installed, you'll click on the variables section and then enable a few built-in variables. So right now we have these variables, these built-in variables installed, but the ones that we'll use specifically include page path under the pages section, history source, and new history fragment under the history section. And you can also enable most of these built-in variables, like the ones under pages and clicks and forms, for future use. So make sure those are checked off, those are marked, and then you can click out of that. And then we can go back to either the overview section or the tags section and create a new tag. And we'll call this tag GA Pageview TOC for table of content virtual. So then on the tag configuration section, we'll click there and then choose Google Analytics Universal Analytics. So the track type will keep it marked as page view, and then for the Google Analytics settings, we have a GA UA settings variable which includes our GA tracking ID. If you don't have that set up, you can enable override setting and input your tracking ID there. And then we'll click on more settings and fields to set. Add a field, and in the field name, we're going to select page. And for the value, we'll include page path. So you can either type that in beginning with the curly brackets, or you can select it by clicking on the Lego block and choosing page path. And then we'll type in / hash mark to indicate that it's a virtual page view when we look at the report. And then we'll find the new history fragment. So just a brief introduction to the history variables. The history variables refer to the history stack, which temporarily stores the pages of a session, of a user session in the browser. So the new history fragment refers to the piece of the URL that the browser picks up when the user will click on our page link. So for our case, if we go back to inspect our link, in this link here, the link is to hosting, hashmark hosting -builders. So let's leave this page and then navigate back to this page. So we'll click on this page link and notice in the URL bar how the URL ends with webbuildertools.html. And if we click on our anchor link here, notice that it appends the hashmark hosting -builders. So that's what the new history fragment refers to. So this page, this value that we have here, Google Tag Manager will send this to the page field in Google Analytics. So when we look at a report with the page dimension, we'll see whatever value GTM captures when the conditions for the trigger are met. And that's what we'll configure right now. So we'll scroll down to the triggering section, click in there, and then in the top right corner, click on plus. We'll name this history to indicate the type of trigger that we're using. TOC virtual page view trigger. And then click in the tag configuration section, and we'll select history change under the other section. Instead of all history changes, we'll click some, and for the first condition, click on click URL. And we'll choose the condition starts with. So for this field, we'll go over to our web page, our website, copy the domain or the host name, and paste it in here. So we want the click URL to start with our host name, because the click URL will still have the same host name. The user won't be navigating to another site, but just another section on the page. And then we'll add another condition. For this one, we'll choose click element set to matches CSS selector, and we're looking for the actual link that we'll click on. So it's a open bracket href, the caret sign. That means we want the value to start with what we set it to. So equals, open quotation mark, and then hash mark. So we want the click element to start with a hash mark. Close quotation and close bracket. So this will match our actual link. So if we go to our web hosting website builder link, you can see it's the A tag and then the href and then the starts with hash mark. So that should meet this condition. We'll add another condition, and for this one we'll choose history source equals pop state. So this looks for the condition where the active history entry changes, meaning the user navigates to another page, they press the back or the forward button in the browser, or they just load a new location. So in our case, that's clicking on this URL fragment here, this anchor link. So we'll save this, and then we'll save the page view, and now we can preview it to test it out. So this matches the host name, the URL, the website URL. So we'll click on connect, wait for the page to load, navigate to our page that we're testing this on, and then we'll click one of these anchor links. So let's go back to our Tag Assistant tab, click on continue, and we can see that we have a virtual page view for our table of content link firing, but we'll see if it works the way that we want it to. So click on this, and then we'll click on this history message so we can see the actual values. So you want to make sure to display variables as values instead of names. And if we look through our values here, we can see this page dimension, and it captures the page path as expected along with the hash mark and the history fragment, the new history fragment, hosting-builders. So it is a page view, and we can see that that history trigger met all our conditions. And we can validate this tracking in Google Analytics with the real-time report. So in the left navigation, click on real-time, and you can click on either overview or content. So here's our active page, and there's our URL with the fragment. So let's move on to the next scenario where we want to track something like a process, like a checkout process or a registration process, some type of funnel on the website. So one example of this is on this page here. So this isn't our page, but it's just an example. So if you notice, this is the URL, and it has these steps here. So let's see what happens when you click on next. So we'll answer this question. Let's say yes for the sake of the example. Click on next. And unlike our test website, nothing happens to the URL. There's no fragment added. You can't tell that the user has progressed to the next step unless you track the click or the element. So we can see that we're on step 2 now. So this is the type of engagement we want to track. We're not going to track this because we don't have access to the tracking for that page. Instead, we're going to use this. So we have this frame here. We have step 1, step 2, and then finish. It's not quite the same, but the concepts that you can use for tracking will be, instead of clicking on a next button after each step, our case here, our example, we're just clicking on each of these tabs to advance to the next step. So for this, each of our steps are differentiated. You can see the text is different, step 1, step 2, and finish. If you have a process like this where there's only a next button, you want to add something that differentiates each button. So for example, if you have access to the code, or you can ask a developer to add an ID to the button depending on what step you're in. So you can add an ID like we did for our table of contents for each link, each anchor link here. But for the steps, you could add an ID for next step 2 or something like that. But since we have our steps labeled here, we don't need to do that. And we'll go to our tag manager. And what we need here is a couple of built-in variables. So click on variables in the left navigation, and these are the built-in variables that you need. If you need to add those, click on configure, and we'll go back to our overview section and add a new tag, and we'll call this GA Pageview process virtual. We'll click on the tag configuration section, choose our GA tag, keep it as a page view, use this GA settings variable, enable overriding settings in this tag, click on more settings, fields to set, add a field, page, and for the value, we're going to use page path. I'll use the Lego block option this time. So I'm going to scroll down or search for it, page path / hash mark. And then if I just add something like click text, then it'll just add step space 1 to the end of the value. So it would look something like this. And that's not how URLs work. So what we're going to do for this example specifically, you may not need to do this if your variable is just one word, but we are going to add a new variable. We'll call this lookup table virtual process. Click on variable configuration, and we'll choose lookup table under utilities. And for the input variable, we're going to select click text, add a row, and then add rows for each step. So our inputs will be step 1, and the output, let's do step -1. Add a row for step 2. Set the output to step -2. Add another row for finish. And we'll just set this to lowercase. You can choose to format the values if you want, but we'll just save this. And this will add that variable to the page dimension here. So then we'll scroll down to our triggering section, click there, add a new trigger, click in the trigger configuration section to choose a trigger type, and under the click section we'll choose all elements. And let's call this click process steps virtual trigger. Click in the configuration area and select some clicks. Change click element to page path. Set this equals to, and our page path will be / example -process, and that's what matches the page that we're currently on. So we'll add another condition, click element, we can keep that and set this equal to matches CSS selector. Now we'll go back to our page and identify the CSS selector that will match clicks no matter which step that we click on. So we'll right click select inspect, and we can see that it's also an href. There's a hash mark, so there's step 2, and it falls under this list item with this class. If we scroll, or if we hover over this item here, it's for step 1, but we notice the class, instead of 1 for step 2 _1, it's _0 for step 2, and for finish it's _2. So what we can do is create a selector, or input a selector that will capture the list item element along with the class and the A element. So let's go back to our, before we do that, let's just copy this, because we'll want this when we input the value. So click element, list item, open bracket, class, our caret for begins with equals open quotation, and then paste our class, and we're going to delete our number because we want this to match each of those tabs, each of those options, each of those steps. Close quotation and close bracket. And then we want the A element as well, so what we'll do is type greater than sign and then A, and this means that it's looking for A as a child of this list element. Then we'll select another to add another condition and click on click text this time. We'll choose matches regex, and for the click text we'll just input each of the steps here. So that would be step 1, and then this character to indicate or, step 2, or finish. So let's save this trigger, and then we can go ahead and save the tag, and now we can preview this. So this matches the URL that we want to test on. Click on connect, wait for our page to load, and we'll navigate to our example process page to find the element for the feature here. So here's our process. So click on step 2 and then finish, and we'll also click on step 1. Then we can go back to our tag assistant page, and we can see our process virtual tag, our virtual page view, has fired 3 times. So let's click on that, and we'll go through each message here. So click on this 11 click message. So if you remember, the first one that we clicked on was for step 2, and that matches exactly what we're looking for. So it will send this value to the page dimension in Google Analytics. You can see all the conditions for the trigger were met. But let's go to the variables so you can see what variables were captured. So some of the variables that we used include click text, step 2. The click element variable captures this entire thing here, but what we're really concerned with is the last few items. So if you recall our trigger, this matches our condition. The list item, and then the class, and then the A element. And then we can go down and take a look at our page path variable, and that matches as well. We can see the same thing for the other clicks. We go back up and scroll to tags. We can see that the field for the page is set to this value, which is what we were expecting, and then the same for 13, where that's set to step 1. We can also validate this in Google Analytics real-time reporting. So make sure you're in the real-time report from the left navigation in the overview section. And you can see the current pages, the active page, but we can also see the content, the other pages in the content section. So if you click on page views for the last 30 minutes, we can see our pages all right there. And now we can use this data. Well, first you want to make sure if it looks good to you, make sure you submit and publish the container so that the changes, the tags, and the triggers are live and will send the data to Google Analytics. Once that's done, you can configure a funnel to include those page views. So we can call this example process. Click on continue, or let's choose destination. Continue. And for this, we'll set this equal to example process hash mark. I believe we need a forward slash in there as well. Yep, forward slash hash mark finish. Switch the funnel option on, and then for step 1, we can say, we can just call this step 1, and for the screen / page, we'll set this to example process / well, actually we'll just leave this for example process, and then add another step for step 2, example process / hash mark step 2. Make sure that matches the value that's captured. Yep. You can verify this goal and see we already have data from our testing, and you can save this. So that's how you configure tracking for virtual page views with Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. If you found this useful, like the video. If you want more content on measuring user behavior to improve digital experiences, subscribe to the channel and check out the website with the link in the description. We'll see you in the next episode.